Yeah, a lot warmer than where I live. Look, I just thought I'd show you a brief snip from a film we're working on. We haven't finished it yet. It's just in the cut at the moment. But it's one that we shot in Israel, and we just had fun adventures doing it, actually. Some good, some bad. I don't know if you've seen those drones, those little helicopters, battery-operated helicopters that can carry a camera. We've gotten one of those, and we've been using it to try and get better shots and, push ourselves. And we took it down to the south of Israel, to Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And the jolly thing, I was being filmed. The boys were filming my son and me, and we're climbing up towards the caves of Qumran there. And you hear this nice sound. We're not allowed to look at the camera, so we hear this nice sound. That's all good, okay, it's probably fine. And we hear on the radio, go this, okay, walk. So we start to walk. And then we hear, we're like, oh, that doesn't sound good. So we turn around and look at the camera, and the helicopter's doing flips. I don't know if it had caught a bad radio wave or been jammed by some Israeli Defense Force thing. I don't know what had happened to this day. But it just developed a mind of its own. It developed artificial intelligence, which I'm going to talk about later today, and it was gone. And it took us 3 hours to find the jolly thing, and by that time it was smashed to pieces. It was a tough... Yeah, thank you for the sympathy. It's like a little boy lost his teddy bear, I lost the helicopter. That's how I felt. So thank you for your big sarcastic... that's the kind of thing that happens. But then, and you try and theologize that, and you say, well, why, oh Lord? And, join a lot of people who've asked that question about more serious matters. But then providence happens. We wanted to get into the Kotel, the Western Wall, sometimes called the Wailing Wall. And if there's a holier site in Judaism, I don't know what it is, and you're just not allowed to film in there. And our guide said to us, I said, let's try, let's give it a go. We'll pitch up. They can only just throw us out. So we pitch up there. And it so happens that we turn up on the day when everybody's having their bar mitzvah. And everybody's Uncle Morty has got the family video camera in there, and they're filming everything. There's about 100 cameras inside the hotel. And so we just walk in, no problem. So I've just seen again and again these little, you can call them minor providences, but they mean a lot. And it just kind of keeps you getting up in the morning when you see that kind of cooperation from the invisible producer. And it's just encouraging stuff. Let me show you 4 minutes of that film, if the boys are ready. Well, I'm not going to go over it in detail today, but just a couple of weeks ago we did a little outreach at Newcastle University using the films and some talks and stuff. And on the Friday night, there was a guy sitting in the pub. He was relaxing after his big week. He was an agnostic, had no evidence for God's existence, and was a bit open on the question. And somebody walked up to him in the bar and gave him a handbill and said, this starts in about 10 minutes. Do you want to come? And he's like, well, okay then. So he turns up, completely cold turkey, walks into a talk on Daniel 9. That's the prophecy when I was 18 that just really hammered a nail, I guess, into my head, and just went, hang on, it's true, there's hard evidence here. And he turned up, and at the end of that, blow me away, he says to me, he says to a friend, one of the team, he says, I never knew that there was so much evidence for the existence of God and for God knowing the future. And he said, and he'd worked it out in his own head, he said, well, if God knows the future of the world, he probably knows my future, and that's mind-blowing. And he said, I'm going to go home and read the book of Daniel. The team member he told that to has since invited him to Bible studies, and the guy's on the journey to faith. I mean, that's the power of this stuff, And Adventists know this. Prophecy is the big faith builder. But there's a bunch of others as well. And I want to talk about those over the next few days. Prophecy, predictive prophecy, I probably don't need to even say that to this audience, isn't it something you can just hang your hat on? It's something you can actually build a rock-solid confidence on. But there are other things as well, and I'd like to explore just a few of those over the next few days. And the first question I'd like to ask, if we can just flip to the PowerPoint, depending, is this one. Is there a great big mind behind the universe, or is the universe mindless? Aha! All right, thank you. Now, there's a pretty organized new atheist movement going on who'll tell you that it is, that the universe is mindless. This is Professor Richard Dawkins, the one on the right. And they just recently paid for a bus advertising campaign a few years ago in the UK that said, "There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life." They wanted it to say, "There's no God." But the UK Advertising Standards Council got onto them and they said, "No, all claims in advertising have to be demonstrable and you can't prove that." So they went, "Okay, we'll make it there's probably no God." And that's the campaign, and it's been largely imitated. When it went to Germany, the Germans are even more tough about advertising standards, and they said, "There is, with the probability probably approaching zero, no God." Even more fine print on the side of the bus. And others ripped it off. "There's probably no cod. Now stop complaining and eat your sardines." And this one's my favourite. "There's probably no bus. So don't just stand here, start walking." And I want to ask, are they right? Is there no God? If you say yes, you would be called a materialist. In philosophy, a materialist is someone who believes that there's only material. That's all there is to the world, just stuff, matter. Or a naturalist. In other words, everything has to be according to natural laws. If you say no, the universe is not mindless, you're a theist, a believer in God. We have this in common, of course, with Jews, with Muslims, with Hindus, although they're polytheists. They believe there's more than one, about 300 million last time I counted. That's another interesting discussion. But I wanted to just read you a bit this morning to start with from some atheists so that we look that fairly in the eye. Here's Alex Rosenberg, who's written a very witty book called An Atheist's Guide to Reality. And he says this: "Is there a God? No. What is the nature of reality? What physics says it is. What is the purpose of the universe? There is none. What's the meaning of life? Ditto. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. Is there a soul? Is it immortal? Are you kidding? Is there free will?" That's an interesting one. We'll come back to that. Is there free will? Not a chance. What happens when we die? Everything pretty much goes on as before, except us. What's the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? Get this, we'll talk about this tomorrow. There is no moral difference between them. Oh, good. Because if I want to go up to Thailand and abuse a child, you get what I'm saying? It's a horrible, horrible thing to say. It's an extreme illustration. But there's no moral difference between them? Well, why should I be moral? Because it makes you feel better than being immoral. And I think about 90% of Australians would go, "I don't agree with that. The things that Christians say immoral make me feel pretty good at the time." So I'm just not sure that argument really holds up. Let me read you from an older atheist. This is Richard Robinson. "The human situation is this: each one of us dies." Cool. Feeling good yet? Is this making your day? "He ceases to pulse or breathe or move or think. He decays and loses his identity. His mind or soul or spirit ends with the ending of his body because it is entirely dependent on his body. The human species too will die one day, like all species of life. One day there will be no more men." And he means no more women as well. "We are permanently insecure. We are permanently in danger of loss, damage, misery, and death. There is no God to make up for the limitations to our power, to rescue us when the forces affecting us get beyond our control, or provide us hereafter with an incorruptible haven of absolute security. No heaven. We have no superhuman Father who is perfectly competent and benevolent, as we perhaps once supposed our actual Father to be." Interesting, the link between God and parent, particularly father, isn't it? So he says, what attitude ought we to take up? It would be senseless to be rebellious, since there's no God to rebel against. It would be wrong to let disappointment or terror or apathy or folly overcome us. It would be wrong to be sad. Really? I think that'd be pretty appropriate, actually. Wrong to be sad or sarcastic or cynical or indignant. Cheerfulness! He pulls that out of a hat, doesn't he? Cheerfulness. You've got this gloomy view of the universe and he goes, let's just be cheerful anyway. And I admire his guts, but I'm not sure what you build that on, except maybe a dash of, Disney dust and kind of, I'm not sure. And courage is an essential part of the right attitude. Let us not tell ourselves a comforting tale of a Father in heaven because we're afraid to be alone, but bravely and cheerfully face whatever appears to be the truth. When the Titanic went down, people sang, "Nearer, my God, to thee." At present, we know of no other way to strengthen ourselves. Can you hear the honesty there? We know of no other way to strengthen ourselves in our most testing and tragic times. Yet this way has become dishonest. Thus it's urgent for us to create new ceremonies. I have no idea how to do this, but I believe it can be done if we try. You know the name of the website that I got that quote from? positiveatheism.org. I'm not seeing, with due respect to the people, I'm not noticing much in there that's positive, are you? Maybe I've missed something. Compare that to the statement of one of the earliest believers in God we have words from. He says this, I know that my Redeemer is alive, and that he will stand at last upon this dusty earth. And even though worms will destroy this body of mine, isn't he frank about that? Isn't he freakishly frank? Yeah, I know the worms will eat me one day. Yet in my body I will see God. There's a guy saying, even if worms eat my body, I'll still get my body back in some way. He's talking about resurrection. This is arguably one of the earliest books written before Moses wrote, potentially. I will see him myself. I'll see God with my own eyes. That thought already moves me to my core. You can hear him jumping up and down about it. I'll see him, I'll see him, I'll see him. That sounds like a basis for hope. It doesn't mean it's true, but it just means that it's a much more solid basis for hope. Here's a well-known Australian atheist I've interviewed and had a lot of respect for. I believe and always have believed that life is totally meaningless, says Philip Adams, and that we have no destiny, no purpose, no author. We just are. For a while, anyway, and then we aren't. I know that we live on a minor planet. He's right about that. We talked about that yesterday. Live on a minor planet, in an off-Broadway solar system, on the edge of the Milky Way, and in the final analysis, we're as significant as the 8 billionth grain of sand beyond the final palm trees in the most distant oasis in the Sahara. That's all your life matters. You're not worth a grain of sand. The whole world. Consequently, I believe it's absurdly vain to see ourselves as echoing God's image. And just as silly to anthropomorphize, in other words, to make it sound human, or to Disneyify the concept of God into anything vaguely human. Like the hippopotamus or the hedgehog, humans are simply an evanescent expression of the life force. Evanescent, we're not here for long. And the life force, whatever that might be, it almost sounds like God by another name, sneaking into this atheist picture. We're as destined for oblivion as dodos and dinosaurs. And respect to that guy. But is that a happy or a pretty gloomy picture of the world? Again, just because it's not nice doesn't mean it's not true. But here he says, clearly, if you live in a universe where there's no meaning, there is finally no absolute morality. We're back to that again. We're back to that again. Tomorrow we'll talk about that one. When you interview Philip Adams about his childhood, as Terry Lane did in a book, I think about 20 years ago, he says this, so that was my childhood. He describes being the son of a minister. And his dad went away to World War II, and he kind of never saw him, and the marriage broke up, and then there was some pretty sad times between his father and his stepfather, and his mum was pretty fierce. And he went and lived with his grandparents. To cut a long story short, he had a fairly painful childhood by all accounts. And he says this, that was my childhood, living under great tension at home and not being able to rely on my natural father for support. From about the age of 6, I guess because I felt lost and alienated, I began to doubt the paternalism, the fatherliness of the universe. And that's sad. Imagine a little kid down there in Melbourne, missing his dad, and projecting that onto the whole universe. There can't be a dad up there who loves me either. Kind of breaks your heart. I knew intuitively that the universe is completely senseless and meaningless, that there is no reason to it, and that there's no paternal figure in the sky. Isn't it funny that sometimes just good, wise love is the answer to some of these doubts? It's funny, it doesn't mean we shouldn't learn the good apologetical reasoning with people, but just kindness at that point may have made a difference. And Adam says most atheists don't come to this conclusion happily. I can assure you that most atheists, in my experience, do not happily embrace that black hole. They'd rather like there to be a father and a purpose and a meaning and a destiny. Couldn't have said it better myself. They'd rather like there to be a father and a purpose and a meaning and a destiny. Why then is atheism so emotionally appealing? Maybe this woman's got it right on her t-shirt. No God, no guilt. Maybe religion's associated with upping people's levels of guilt and you're not good enough and you don't measure up and... But in fact, if we heard it right, Jesus didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. And maybe we need to emphasize that more with people. What I want to talk, having talked about that, I guess we've talked about the implications first. I guess today we've kind of said, all right, so what about this question? That's so what? That's what we're arguing about. Okay. Let me look at some probabilities, and I want to look at 4 things this morning. A designer universe, the DNA, how did life go live, and consciousness. We won't have time to do them all thoroughly, and we've done number 1 yesterday in that film already. In a sense, we've already talked about the designer universe. If you weren't there, let me just quickly sum that up for you. Recently, I was singing a silly old love song to my wife. You know that one, take me to the moon and let me play among the stars. A few of you are humming along. We could do a choir, couldn't we? Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. And it hits me. Take me to the moon? There's nothing to breathe on the moon, and you'd float away. Let me play among the stars. Stars are thermonuclear furnaces. You'd fry if you got anywhere near one of them. Show me what the spring is like. And I'm singing this song to her, and I stop and go, that's a terrible song. He's trying to kill her. He's trying to take her to Mars where it's freezing. I don't want to take you there. I'm happy with Sydney. And she looked at me and she said, you're such a nerd. I took that as a compliment, you know. Maybe I flatter myself. But when you think about it, like we said yesterday in the film, why is there a patch of the universe where it's possible for this body to not just live, but to enjoy itself and to look out at the universe and to wonder and all that stuff? We should be asking ourselves more about that. And I think oftentimes that's ignored. Here's one of the most famous old atheists. He says this, I should say that the universe is just there, and that's all. So to assume your atheist position, all I have to do is just assume that the universe just got here. That's a pretty big starting point. It's a pretty big start. Just assume the universe is here, and that's all. Don't ask any questions about it. Rubbish. Let's not cut off science. Let's ask questions about it. And he's talking in a day before Big Bang Theory became popular. He's talking in a time when, pre the 50s and 60s, when everybody thought there was a steady state and there was just matter had been around forever. And if matter has been around forever, all you've got to do is rearrange matter, and you've got human life and you've got all that stuff. That's kind of easier. Well, it's not easy. We'll talk about that later. But it's easier than what you have to do now, because now since the Big Bang, and I'm not commenting either way. Not commenting either way on that theory. I'm just saying since that theory has become mainstream, atheists have got to say, we've got to explain how the universe began, because apparently it had a beginning. And I actually think that that moves us a bit closer to Genesis. Not all the way, but a bit closer. And so there was another guy that said, our universe is simply one of those things that happen from time to time. The old atheists would say that. The new ones can't, because you can't just assume the universe has always been here. Professor Stephen Hawking, what a mind. He has inherited Sir Isaac Newton's chair at Cambridge. That tells you something. The human race, though, he says, is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet, orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. We're so insignificant that I can't believe the whole universe exists for our benefit. Serious question. Do you feel like a chemical scum? I'm not kidding here. I don't feel like a chemical scum. I know I have scummy tendencies some days, right? But I don't feel like a chemical scum. I have this strange belief that my little life, my little insignificant life, matters. Certainly matters to me. Certainly matters to a few people who love me. Certainly matters, I think, to God. And I don't get up every morning thinking, oh, I'm just a chemical scum, what'll I do today? I get up feeling like I have a purpose and something about my life matters. I may not be, I'm certainly not the Messiah, I'm just a naughty boy. But, I just rebel against that. And tell me about Stephen Hawking. Do you think he's a chemical scum? I think he's incredible. I think despite all kinds of limitations physically, he has demonstrated he has an incredible humanity and an amazing intellect. He's not a chemical scum either. And so I guess I just have to intuitively say that gut level, I think that doesn't pass the common sense test. I don't think anybody, someone who's suffering from depression, someone who hasn't been loved, sure, you can feel like a chemical scum, but even they rebel against that. I just don't buy that quote. I haven't got a big intellectual argument to slam dunk it, but I think if you check, how does this work in real life? You just go, You You got Paul Davies, who's a fascinating book, The Goldilocks Enigma. He goes through, and if you want a really good book to read, he goes through and describes all the ways in which the universe is perfect for our life. He's not a theist. He's kind of agnostic. But he says this, like the proverbial bump in the carpet, the popular multiverse models really shift the problem elsewhere, upper level, from universe to multiverse. See, put it simply, what some of the atheists do now, including the guy in my film yesterday, they come along and say, okay, yes, it's incredible that Earth, so many factors went right for human life. Yes, it's highly unlikely, but there are lots of universes out there. We just can't see them or in any way experience them, but there are multiple universes. And surely if there's multiple universes going on, one of them has got to come up with life. We just happen to live in the one that did, but there are a whole lot of others out there. To put it in gambling terms, if you've got a whole lot of poker games going on in this room, well, somebody's going to pull 4 aces out of the pack, aren't they? And we were just lucky enough to do that. But the problem with that is, as Paul Davies says, it just shifts the problem. For one thing, you've got to explain where all these other universes came from, and that's even harder. And also, probability is still probability. You know, it's still possible for things to be highly unlikely. Let me take you through that in terms of DNA. This is our secondary now. Hopefully we've talked about a designer universe. They often talk about, since the earliest times, they've talked about DNA as being like monkeys typing. Since the earliest creation evolution debates, they talk about, could monkeys type Shakespeare, right? You know those old jokes, right? So a mathematician actually took it seriously, and he said, could monkeys type the 23rd Psalm? And he sat down and ran the numbers, and this is what he came up with. Yes, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Okay, getting the would only take you 34.72 hours for all these monkeys. I forget how many monkeys he had typing. But to type the whole thing, 603 Hebrew letters, that's all. That's not a lot. You can probably write it in a few minutes. Plus spaces and verse numbers. That would take 10 to the 1017 years. I don't know if that number means anything to you, but that's what it is. That's how many years it would take for monkeys to type the 23rd Psalm. And you might say, well, the universe is very old and it's very big, and maybe there's a whole lot of what they call probabilistic resources out there. Maybe there's a whole lot of poker games going on, so that one of them, hang on a bit, this is the longest age that physicists give to the universe, 13.7 billion years. That's nowhere near enough. That number dwarfs it. And so I just say it's highly unlikely. And you take the old infinite monkey theorem, right? You might have heard this one. Let me give you another illustration. I don't know if you've ever sent a message on your iPhone to somebody from your pocket that you didn't mean to send. I seem to send those all the time. In fact, my atheist mate jokes with me. He says, every Saturday morning about 11 o'clock, your stupid phone sends me a message, and it's always speaking in tongues. And he says, what are you trying to tell me something? I'm going, dude, it just happens in my pocket, you know. It's totally random. Now, let's say that my wife finds in my phone a message that says, I love you, Annabelle. I just made up that name, okay? Trust me. And she finds it, and we go, okay, hun, my pocket just typed that. She goes, really? Let's calculate the probability of that. Please, this is a fiction story, okay? I want you to know that. She goes, let's calculate the probability. What's the probability of the first letter coming up? Let's say it's 1 in 26. Rough enough. What about the first 2 letters? Well, it's 1 in 676. The first 26 letters, you get up to 2 times 10 to the 28, and it just starts to get ridiculous. There's no way you would believe, or she would believe, that I typed that, that my pocket randomly typed that message. And the infinite monkey theorem runs on the same kind of thing. And it looks at 130,000 letters in a Shakespeare play, and it says that would take 3.4 times 10 to the 183,000 and something. That's ridiculous. That's a string of zeros from here to Sydney, right? And so the chance of Hamlet, if the observable universe is filled with monkeys typing for all known time, right? So if you take the size of our universe, fill it with monkeys for all 13.7 billion years that physicists will estimate we've been here, your odds are still 1 in 10 to the right? And so, the Monkeys Online experiment tried to demonstrate this. They started in 2003, and the deal was monkeys could type 1 key per second. You start with 100 monkeys. You double the monkeys every 5 days. That's a bit suspicious right there. They're not just typing, are they, those monkeys? But anyway, they're typing 1 key per second on average, and every 5 days they double their numbers. And by the way, there's unlimited bananas. The result is 24 letters from one of the Shakespeare plays took 10 to the 40 monkey years. But the slight problem is the age of the universe is only 10 to the 11. You see the issue. You see the problem with that. And so you have guys who wrote the textbook on thermodynamics, because that's what we're talking about. They say this: the probability of Hamlet is therefore 0 in any operational sense of an event. Translation, ain't going to happen. And that's for Hamlet. Hamlet has 130,000 letters. How many letters does your DNA have? It has 4 million if you're an E. coli bacteria. And if you are, get out of this lecture hall and get into, the waste system somewhere, right? But if you're you, it has 3.5 B for billion letters. And you just go, is that the best explanation you've got at the moment, science? Because you better find a better one. Thomas Nagel, who's a philosopher of science, written a fantastic book recently called Mind and Cosmos. He says this, and he's an atheist. He's no Christian. He says the dominant scientific consensus faces problems of probability that I believe are not taken seriously enough, both with respect to the evolution of life forms through the accidental mutation and natural selection, and with respect to the formation from dead matter of physical systems capable of such evolution. The more we learn about the intricacy of the genetic code and its control of the chemical processes of life, the harder those problems seem, says a highly placed atheist. Now, he doesn't want God in the picture, he hates that idea. But what he's telling us is that the mainstream scientific consensus of today is bankrupt. The emperor has no clothes. Antony Flew, who was one of the scariest atheists for years, also said the same thing. Someone asked him, does the recent work on the origin of life point to a creative intelligence? And he said, yes, I now think it does, almost entirely because of the DNA investigations. And he writes a book with titles like this: Who wrote the laws of nature? Did the universe know we were coming? How did life go live? It's the same question. How do you turn matter, stuff, into a living cell, into a person? And then he ends by saying he's open to omnipotence. And he talks to Bishop N.T. Wright, who's a very a brilliant evangelical scholar in the UK, and a bishop, and he says, let's write a chapter together about the possibility of Jesus and the fact that God might have revealed himself in history. Wow! Marcus and I, some of you have seen our first film with the Albatross and the A380. If you haven't, it's at the bigquestions.com website. But we interviewed a gentleman called Peter Atkins, who's a brilliant atheist. 70 books he'd written at that time. And he says this: a great deal of the universe does not need any explanation. Elephants, for instance. Once molecules have learnt to compete and to create other molecules in their own image, elephants, and things resembling elephants, will in due course be found roaming through the countryside. So it's dead easy. It's just easy. All that has to happen is a whole lot of molecules need to learn to compete, and pretty soon elephants will be born. That's like saying, as soon as you invent the alphabet, suddenly Shakespeare sonnets will just pop onto your page. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Oh, that's not bad. That's just appeared, right? You see the issue. He talks about happen chance being the big thing that drives it. John Lennox, on the other hand, by the way, that's the best book I've read on this topic. If you want one book on hard evidence from science for God, I'd say start with that one. Best book I've read in the last probably decade, actually. And that's a big call. Francis Collins, also, the guy who headed the Human Genome Project, has written a book called The Language of God about DNA. Now, he's a theistic evolutionist. We can share a taxi ride with him to a certain degree, but then I get off. But at least he starts us down the track towards something like biblical creationism. And it's interesting that one of the Bible's accounts of creation begins with that. In the beginning was the Word. It's funny, isn't it, how much of nature seems to be like words, how much DNA seems to be like spelling, for example, how much the logical order of so much of the universe seems to be like language. And it's funny that John would begin with that. In the beginning was the Word. Okay, number 4. Oh, by the way, number 3, how did life go live? We've briefly mentioned that. Time will beat us on a full discussion of that. But let me give you a quick one on consciousness. Can I be honest with you? This is one of the tougher topics This could put you to sleep. This has the potential to cause brain injuries. Okay, so bear with me for a few minutes. I will do my best to explain it. If at the end of the next 5 minutes you kind of go, what did he just say? Don't feel bad. It took me a long time to even get to grips with this. And to be honest, I'm not sure I still get it. I went to a bookshop in London recently and just said, what have you got on philosophy of mind? And they said, oh yes, come this way, sir. And here's this book shelf this wide, you know, all these titles, philosophy, neuroscience. I have a kindergarten knowledge of that stuff, okay? But here's at least the beginnings of something to do with that. You've got Raymond Tallis, a philosopher, saying the attempt to fit consciousness into the material world has failed dismally. Conscious subjects and their mental lives are inescapable components of reality, not describable by the physical sciences. Let me put this to you really simply. What we're saying is that the brain that you carry around between your ears, however good you think it may or may not be, is the most complex thing in the universe. It makes the space shuttle or that Chinese power station look like a kid's wooden block. It's incredibly complicated. That's the first thing to say. The other thing to admit is that science doesn't know that much about it. When you talk to a Ben Carson or people at the top of their game, they go, we're in our babyhood of knowledge about this stuff. But what we can say about the brain, first of all, is that it's got way more than you think it would need just to survive. If survival of the fittest, if Darwinian kind of thinking put us here, why do we have so much more than we would need to survive? For example, why do we have music? Now I know you probably learned in high school that birds sing so they can attract other birds. It's all about reproduction. And sure, when you look at the behavior of certain rock bands, you'd think that that was the truth, right? But is that really all that's going on? Is music really just there to get my genes into the next generation? Or can we, what a grim, grey view of the world that's just there for a function. What if it's actually there just for fun? What if it's there for human beings to express things to one another and to enthuse about big ideas in a way that is beyond words? What if it's to celebrate love and the divine and all that kind of stuff? What if it's way more than you need for reproduction? Because I'm here to tell you, I'm not that great at music, yet I've had some success in reproduction, okay? So, jokingly, I'm not sure that the two necessarily go together, okay? The other thing to say is, what about humour? What's the evolutionary purpose of us having a good laugh? I haven't heard a good evolutionary explanation of why we have this thing called a sense of humour, whatever that is. How does that help us survive in the grim struggle for survival? Well, it doesn't. It makes life good and it makes life fun. And I'm going to tell you it's part of the image of God in us, right? I'm going to tell you it's something in a human being that we don't need just for survival, but it's something there for enjoyment. And it seems to speak to me that our brains show us that we're built for something more than just mere grim survival. We're built to live and to love and to enjoy ourselves, or as the psalmist put it, or the old Anglican prayer book put it, to know God and to enjoy him forever. Right? That's what we're wired up to do, it seems to me. And there's a bunch of evidence in that, I think, in our brains. The other thing to say is, your brain is far superior in its consciousness to most computers. Now I know they can do narrow functions brilliantly. They can guide missiles and aeroplanes. I mean, please, I'm not here to poo-hoo technology. We went in one of our films and interviewed some of the best artificial intelligence professors in the world. And those guys will tell you, some of them will say, one day we'll get it. One day we'll have a human being, that is, a machine rather, that is truly conscious. But at the moment, all that a computer can really do is obey instructions. Don't get me wrong, I think they're brilliant, and I'm certainly not pretending to be an expert in this field. There'll be 50 people in this tent who know more about this than I do. But my understanding is computers can only follow instructions, algorithms. And if you think of a soccer-playing computer, right? Brilliant. But it has this list of instructions, and all it says is, if the ball is to your left, turn left. If the ball is ahead of you, walk to the ball. If the ball is between you and the goal, kick. If it's not, get the ball between you and the goal, and then kick. And it happens really fast, but it's just a string of instructions. It's not actually thinking. And it's not actually experiencing. The computer doesn't really care about the soccer game like you do. It doesn't really care about the results of the football match. like I did on Saturday night when my team was knocked out of the NRL comp, right? It doesn't really know what the score even means. It's just doing what it's told. And in some ways, it's fair to say that you are free. You're not just following a list of instructions. Yes, your parents probably programmed a lot of good things into you. Yes, you probably try to follow God's law. But you do both those things as a free person. And ask any parent, at what age does your kid begin slavish obedience to you? I'm still waiting for that to happen. Right? They're very free. Even at a time when I can pick up their bodies and physically put them where I want them, their brains are still doing what they want to do, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing. That's part of the image of God in us. But you can't get that. You've got that. A computer can't do that. And I know, I've seen a lot of those Hollywood fiction films. I love those films. Terminator and the one with Robin Williams in it, Millennial Man is in some of the... Hollywood loves the idea of machines being able to become human. But if you talk to these AI professors, they'll tell you, it's a great story, but it's fiction. And some will say, we might crack it if we can just solve the hard problems of consciousness. Others will say, it's not going to happen. I talked to one of the top guys in Japan and he said to us, I've spent 20 years of my life trying to get artificial intelligence. And it's not just that we're not doing it well. It's not just that we need to get faster or bigger or better. There's an actual problem of categories that we've got to jump. And I have no idea. I don't think it can ever be done. Some will say it can, but he's saying not. I'll be interested to see where it goes. But what can we say about our brains? What I'm really trying to get at here is the mind is not the same as the brain. There's more to you and to your conscious experience than can be explained in only physical terms and explained only by science. I'm not poo-hooing science's attempts. Great. But I think there's more going on than that. The mind is not the same as the brain. How do we know that? Well, first of all, you are you, even though you've got a whole bunch of different parts to your brain. Even though you've got different parts doing different things. One of them is probably right now controlling your digestion of breakfast. One of them is controlling your breathing, because you're not sitting there going, breathe, okay, I breathe out, okay, breathe in. It's just all happening. Part of your brain is just doing that below the surface of your consciousness, is just working away. And all of that somehow gangs up to be you. And you don't feel like all different parts, except on a very confused Monday, but you don't feel like all different parts. You feel like you, right? There's this thing called I that I experience, and you do too. And not only is that, we have a unity of consciousness despite all the different parts of our brain, and also across time. 5 years ago, if I'd met up with you and then met you again today, it'd still be the same you. And okay, I might be a bit wrinkly or a bit whatever to look at, but it's still the same me. And I might have learned a few things and hopefully unlearned some, but that doesn't mean I am not still here. And the funny thing is that in that time, almost all of my brain cells have been replaced. So it's not the same brain. It's like the old joke about the farmer that had the axe, and he'd replaced the handle 20 times and the blade 10 times, but it was still the same axe. And that's what's going on in your head. And so we know that there's more to your mind than just your brain. The third reason we know that is that there's a thing called intentionality. Now here's where it gets really sticky. Just have a little nap or bear with me, whatever you want. I'm not offended if you kind of have a little doze, and I'll sing and wake you up at the end, okay? But intentionality says you might be sitting there thinking about a bunch of things. You might be going, when is this really heavy part going to be over? Or I hope I get this, or oh, that was interesting, or whatever. You might be thinking, breakfast, oh, that hash brown is still with me, that was good. You might be thinking later in the day, I want to meet up with I just saw that friend. Whole lot of things are going through your mind, right? But you've also got intentionality. You might be sitting there thinking about, next week I'm going to Stradbroke with my kids. Or next, I'm going to Threadboat or whatever. Okay. So in other words, your brain cells are thinking about something else. They're thinking about something else. And the thing is this, cells don't have intentionality. They don't have the property of being about something else. You can't look at the cells of your thumb, for example, and go, those cells are about skiing in Threadbow. No, they're not. They're just cells. But you can look at your brain cells, although I don't advise it, but you can, and you can go, those cells are thinking about something else. They're currently about something else, but there's no physical thing there that represents that. Does that make any sense? A rock is not about the sky, it's just a rock. But somehow a brain cell can be about walking down the Champs-Élysées in Paris in springtime And that's what it's thinking about. But what brain state is there that corresponds to that? In other words, we're learning more and more about what a thought is, kind of a little electrochemical zap going through cells, but there's no physical equivalent to the thoughts that you have, which shows us that the mind is not the same as the brain. People like Rosenberg, who I quoted before, will try to say to you, you're never actually thinking about anything. He says that, you're never really thinking about anything. And I go, actually, I'm thinking about what you just said. I'm thinking about you telling me that I'm not thinking about anything, and I'm thinking it's bunk. Right? That's a tough concept. I hope I made some sense of that. Let me show you another one. There's also a thing called qualia. And qualia is the experience. If you stick your finger in a flame, what's meant to happen? Well, your body's meant to pull the finger out and protect itself, right? But you also have the experience of, ah! And so there's not just the physical experience, there's also the experience you have. Put it this way, your life is in a way like a big movie. And right now you're sitting there and you're looking at me or away or somewhere, and your ears are feeding in the soundtrack, and your behind's giving you signals from the chair you're sitting on, and you can feel on your skin the temperature of the air, and you're sensing the person next to you and reading their body language in certain subconscious ways, and a whole lot of stuff is going on in that movie, okay? And part of that is qualia, the experience of things. You look and you go, those flowers are a beautiful purple, or this temperature is this. Qualia is not something that we can explain physically. It doesn't have a physical, basis to it, really. Put it to you this way. Here's a woman called Mary, and she's a color scientist. She knows everything there is to know about wavelengths of light and how the eye works and focus and optics and all of that stuff. She's the world's leading expert, let's imagine, in those things. But in this silly story, she's grown up in a black and white world. Her parents have purposely locked her up in a black and white laboratory and painted everything black and white, including her. I know it's a silly story. She's black and white, but she knows everything there is to know about color. And then one day she goes outside and she actually sees color for the first time. Question, do you think she learned anything? Do you think she learned anything by going out and seeing color for the first time? Absolutely. Just like you did when they told you all these years about what love was like, and then bang, you fell in love. Did you learn something? Yeah, because you experienced it. That's qualia, okay? And that shows us qualia are real, but they're non-functional. You don't need qualia to survive. You just need to pull your finger out of the flame. You don't need to feel it. That's all you need. And so why do we have this thing called qualia? The classic example of this was by Thomas Nagel. He wrote an essay called, What's It Like to Be a Bat? What is it like to be a bat? And he tries to imagine what it's like to be a bat. And that's a fascinating kind of bit of thinking, because we know that bats don't see as we see, they hear. How do they put their picture of the world together in their minds? They do it through their ears. They get all this information. And if there's a bat in here right now, you know what it's doing? It's sending out signals of sound. And let's imagine I'm a bat. I know, an old bat. And I'm firing out these signals of sound, and most of them are just going through the air and bouncing back from that back wall at me. And so I know that there's a great big space there. But some of them hit those two poles and that screen, and they come bouncing back at me quickly. And the signals bouncing back from there arrive way faster than the ones that have gone out to the back. And so my brain puts it all together and goes, don't fly into the pole. And bats are so brilliant at that, they can actually fly between the blades of a slow-moving fan, unbelievably. Right? And the other thing, when you think about it, bats have got to put out their own sound and also receive it. In other words, they've got a speaker right near a microphone. You don't need to ask the PA guys up the back what a disaster that can be. If you've got a speaker going right near a microphone, you get these feedback loops, just trying to keep you awake, and you have that happening. Like, so how on earth does the bat kind of go beep and not deafen itself at the same time? Because the thing's, it's got to bounce and it's got to come back. And how does it separate which bounces which? Did that one come back from a pole quickly, or did it come from the back wall slowly a while ago, or what's going on? And so the bat kind of, the tone of it goes up and down. So the beeps go ba 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 ba, and the bat's putting all this complicated information out there and catching it back and putting together a picture of the world. Unbelievable stuff. One thing we do know about bats is that they find male bats have their definition of a really beautiful bat woman. Sorry, had to say it. Their definition of a really beautiful female bat is hairiness, baby. They just love a hairy woman. Because the sound that bounces back from a hairy woman is really fuzzy, right? And they find that gorgeous. I don't get that. But what's it like to be a bat? I've told you a little bit about what it's like to be a bat, but do you think I really know? No, because I've never done it. And that's the thing with qualia. I don't know what it's like to be a bat. I can't tell you what it would feel like to be able to navigate through a room just by ears alone. Some blind friends of mine have tried to describe what that's like, and I don't get it. I'm fascinated by it. And so the point is, there's this thing called qualia, there's this thing called consciousness. Your experience, because it is so personal to you, it is really hard for science to describe it impersonally. Because your mental experience is first person, me, it's really hard to put it in objective terms when it's so subjective. And that's the challenge with consciousness. It's really hard for science to analyze your conscious life. You also can't explain free will, as I briefly mentioned. Why is it, what do cells do? Cells respond to stimuli. So then how do you get free will out of a bunch of brain cells? It's really quite difficult to imagine how that could happen. And yet we do. We believe we do. And also your consciousness is non-spatial. I don't know if this is making sense, but there's no space in which your consciousness takes place. And so you get books like this by Karl Popper and John Eccles, The Self and Its Brain. And they say that your brain is the piano, but yourself is the piano player. In other words, there's this other part to you that is not physical. And that's what we're really driving at with all of this. If none of that made sense to you, don't feel bad. Here's the bottom line. How do we explain your thinking? Well, we either explain it as the brain cells just doing what brain cells do. Daniel Dennett has tried to do it that way. If you read that book, it's one of the most unsatisfying descriptions of consciousness. The book is called Consciousness Explained. And yet when you read it, dozens of different reviewers have said it's a great book, Consciousness Explained. It does everything except explain consciousness. There's a second way to look at it, and that is, after René Descartes, that consciousness suggests dualism. In other words, here's where it gets interesting. There's more than just physical stuff in the universe. There's also another quality of thing called mind, or maybe spirit, if you prefer. And guess what? You've got one. Now I know, I'm an Adventist, dualism. Adventists take a unique view of that. We say your soul can't exist without your body. Spot on. But it's really important to drive at the fact that there are two different parts to a person. There's body and soul. Now we will emphasize as Adventists that they're unified, that they're part of one system. I think that's another really useful conversation as well. But all I want to drive at today is to say that there's more to you than just the physical. That's what the last 10 minutes was about. You might just say to me, well, why didn't you just say that? And that's fine. But you've got the idea that there's more to you than just the physical. And if that's the case, it makes it much more likely that there's a soul, that there's a God, that there's a category called spiritual in the world. I'm going to spare you Alvin Plantinga's arguments on that because he's probably done enough. Let me just read you from Nagel. Consciousness is the most conspicuous obstacle to a comprehensive naturalism. Oops, that wasn't good. Aha. That relies on the resources of physical science. The existence of consciousness seems to imply that the physical description of the universe, in spite of its richness and explanatory power, is only part of the truth, and that the natural order is far less austere, far less grim, than it would be if physics and chemistry accounted for everything. If we take this problem seriously and follow out its implications, it threatens to unravel the entire naturalistic world picture. Yet it's very difficult to imagine viable alternatives. It's not difficult for me. Let me put this really simply. You've got an incredible, incredible brain. I don't care what your teacher said. You've got an incredible, incredible brain, right? And there's two stories about how you got it. The first story says that a whole lot of lifeless, senseless matter and stuff turned into simple cells, and those simple cells eventually became conscious, and somehow your conscious life switched on. There's another story that says that there's a great big consciousness out there in the universe, and that amazing mind, heart, soul, being, spirit put a little bit like himself into you. and that you're wandering around with a little chip off the old block, if I can put it that way. You're a little chunk of the image of God in you. The image, the likeness of God is part of what it means to be a human being. I think the second one of those stories makes a lot more sense. The more we learn about neuroscience and philosophy of mind, the more the God story seems to make bucket loads of sense. It explains our free will. It explains why we have things we don't just need for survival, things we would use for fun and for love and for enjoyment. It explains why we have this incredible curiosity and freedom of will for all that has cost the human race. I think it's something precious. I think that story is much more convincing than the one that says your conscious life basically just evolved from matter. That to me is one of the major. I know it's complicated stuff, and look, if I could have put that more clearly, I'll try to do that next time. But it seems to me that the existence of consciousness in us is a pretty big clue to the fact that it's had its origin in great big consciousness out there in God. And so for those four reasons, I would say the universe is not mindless. Oops, just a second. What I would say too is, other than botheration, what have I done with this? One way to spoil your conclusion, isn't it? Okay, that's embarrassing. Just sing or something, will you? Just keep the show on the road. That's good. Okay, now we're talking. Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. This is a summary of what you've read. Do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do. Da-dee-da-da-da-da-da. Do-dee-do-do. If you thought that was difficult, read Alvin Plantinga's description of consciousness. Whoa, it'll make your ears bleed. This is the quote I'm after. The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and true science. Whoever does not know it and can no longer wonder, can no longer marvel, is as good as dead, and his eyes are dimmed. It was the experience of mystery, even if mixed with fear, that engendered religion. And, there's more, a knowledge of the existence of something that we cannot penetrate, our perceptions of the profoundest reality and the most radiant beauty, which only in their most primitive forms are accessible to our minds. It is this knowledge and this emotion that constitute true religiosity. I love that. What he's trying to say is, I'm not inviting you to learn a few little simple answers and a few little basic doctrines about God and say, done, tick that off. I'm inviting you to lifelong curiosity and to eternal learning and learning and chasing after God with your mind. And I think the Bible invites us to that. Deuteronomy 29:29, it says, the secret things belong unto the Lord, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, so that we may do all the words of this Torah. It's a beautiful text. I think what God's saying is, there's a whole lot about me that is well beyond your little childish human minds at the moment. Give me 1,000 years or so though. But what you can know is mind-blowing. And I think sometimes Christians, we don't need to shut down people's curiosity and say, just have faith. We need to fan their curiosity and grow it. Because I think God has enough mystery and enough interest and enough curiosity and conundrums to the whole topic of God and who he is and what he does and what he's like, that we will never, ever get bored for a bazillion years. And I guess what I've tried to say this morning is I think there's hard evidence that there is a God. I don't think there's proof. I can't prove anything to you. Last time I went to a philosophy lecture, I even doubted if I existed, right? I can't prove to you this morning that I exist. You might say, well, I can prove I exist and come up and punch you in the nose. But maybe I'm just imagining that, you know? Maybe I'm just a brain in a bottle going, oh, someone just punched me in the nose, which I don't even have, right? It's very hard to prove anything, but I do think there's strong evidence pointing in the direction of God. I don't think we have anything to fear from scientific inquiry. I think the more we look at the universe and let the data speak for themselves, the more we will be brought towards faith. And on that note, I see we're out of time. I would just like to pray. Sorry we didn't have time for Q&A there. We'll probably do some more tomorrow. But let's close with a prayer, shall we? God, I ask that you would draw us to yourself, that you draw us to your heart through our own emotional experience of you. I pray that you draw us to your mind through your clear teaching in your word and through the curiosity that we see in the world around us. It's almost like you've put it there as a clue to yourself. And since the foundation of the world, your characteristics have been clearly seen and understood by what has been made. And I pray that we'll have a keen eye and a keen ear to be able to see what that's telling us. I pray also that we would have a reason to build our own faith on, and also a reason to give others who would like there to be a father and a destiny and a purpose, but who don't currently have the evidence for that. I pray that you would grow us in our ability to be able to make those arguments to people who are asking those questions, and to do so with gentleness and with respect. I just want to thank you again for calling us to know you and to experience the joy of an eternity in the presence of an infinitely creative and brilliant God. And I pray that we would bring others with us into that. In Christ's name, amen. Have a great day.